Silence from deep space had stretched for 7 months, 4 days, and 16 hours. Commander Sarah Chen stood before the massive holographic display in the central command bunker, 3 kilometers beneath the ruins of Geneva, watching the same constellation of red dots that had haunted her dreams since the Ninth Fleet's last transmission. Each dot represented a ship that should have returned home by now, carrying news of humanity's final diplomatic mission to the Hegemony Council. But the void had swallowed them whole. "Still nothing on the quantum entanglement channels, Commander," reported Lieutenant Torres, his voice barely a whisper in the cavernous command center. The young officer's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the communications array for the 1,000th time that week. Everyone knew what the silence meant, even if nobody dared speak it aloud. The Ninth Fleet had been humanity's last hope, Earth's final attempt at preventing the inevitable. 300 ships, carrying the finest diplomats, scientists, and military personnel the human race could muster, had departed exactly 8 months ago with a singular mission: convince the galactic hegemony that Earth deserved to exist. The ultimatum had been clear: submit to complete subjugation and become a slave species, or face total annihilation. The hegemony had given humanity 1 year to decide. That year was nearly up. Sarah's reflection stared back at her from the darkened viewport that once showed the Swiss Alps. Now it revealed only the twisted metal and glass that remained of the surface world above. The first demonstration of hegemony power had been precise and terrifying. Every major city on Earth had been struck simultaneously by energy beams that turned steel to powder and stone to dust, yet somehow left most of the population alive to witness their own helplessness. It was a message written in the language of absolute power. Resistance was futile. Yet humanity had resisted anyway. "Commander, incoming transmission from Mars Colony," Torres announced, his voice cutting through her reverie. "Priority Alpha." The holographic display shimmered and reformed, revealing the weathered face of Admiral Kane, Earth's last remaining fleet commander. His expression was grim, etched with the weight of impossible decisions. Behind him, the red surface of Mars stretched endlessly, dotted with the silver domes of humanity's backup civilization, a civilization that might soon be all that remained of their species. "Sarah," Kane's voice crackled across the light minutes between worlds. "The Council has reached a decision. We can't wait any longer." Sarah felt her stomach drop. She knew what was coming, had been dreading this moment since the Ninth Fleet first went silent. "Admiral, we still have 3 weeks before the deadline. There's still a chance." "No," Kane's interruption was final, absolute. "The Jupiter monitoring stations detected massive fleet movements in the outer system. The hegemony isn't waiting for their deadline. Long-range sensors show at least 1,000 ships, Sarah, maybe more. They're coming to finish what they started." The command center fell deadly silent except for the soft hum of life support systems and the distant rumble of the planetary defense grid powering up. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 8 billion souls pressing down on her shoulders. When she opened them again, her reflection in the viewport had changed. Gone was the uncertainty, the desperate hope that had sustained her through the long months of waiting. In its place was something harder, colder, the expression of someone who had finally accepted the unthinkable. "How long do we have?" she asked. 72 hours, maybe less. The Martian colonies are already beginning evacuation protocols. The asteroid mining stations, the Luna facilities, even the Europa research outposts, everyone's running for the deep dark. But Earth, Kane's voice faltered for just a moment. "Earth can't run, Sarah. 8 billion people can't just disappear into space. We don't have the ships, we don't have the infrastructure. This is it." Sarah nodded slowly, understanding flooding through her like ice water. The evacuation ships could maybe save a few million at best. Scientists, children, the genetic diversity needed to continue the human species among the stars. But the vast majority would remain, would face whatever the hegemony had planned for those who dared to defy their authority. "The Beijing remnant is already implementing Protocol 7, Kane continued, his words heavy with implication. "Moscow and New Angels have voted to follow suit. If we're going down, Sarah, we're taking as many of those bastards with us as possible." Protocol 7. Sarah had helped write it, back when such preparations seemed like paranoid fantasy rather than desperate necessity. Every remaining nuclear weapon, every orbital defense platform, every piece of military hardware humanity possessed would be turned into a weapon of last resort. Earth would become a fortress, a killing ground designed to extract the highest possible price for humanity's extinction. What about the civilian populations? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Volunteer basis only. The deep shelters can protect maybe 200 million if we're lucky. The rest. Kane's image flickered as solar interference from the approaching hegemony fleet disrupted the transmission. The rest will have to decide for themselves whether to fight or hide. Sarah turned away from the display, her eyes sweeping across the command center, where dozens of officers and technicians continued their work with quiet determination. These people knew they were likely witnessing humanity's final hours, yet none of them had abandoned their posts. There was something beautifully human about that, the stubborn refusal to surrender even in the face of impossible odds. There's something else. Kane's voice drew her attention back to the flickering hologram. Deep space monitoring picked up something unusual 3 hours ago. A single ship, human design, approaching from the direction of the hegemony core worlds. It's not broadcasting any identification codes, but the energy signature. He paused, and Sarah could see the conflict in his weathered features. Sarah, it matches the Ninth Fleet's quantum signatures. For a moment, Sarah forgot how to breathe. A single ship. After 7 months of silence, one vessel limping home from the depths of space. It could mean anything. A survivor bringing news of the fleet's fate. A captured vessel being used as a Trojan horse, or perhaps something even more impossible to comprehend. ETA, she managed to ask. 14 hours, assuming current trajectory, but Sarah, the ship isn't responding to any hails, it's just coming home. The implications were staggering. If the Ninth Fleet had somehow succeeded in their mission, if they had found a way to change the hegemony's mind, or discovered some weakness that could turn the tide of war, then everything might still change. But if it was a trap, if the approaching ship carried nothing but false hope and alien treachery, then humanity's final hours would be poisoned with cruel disappointment. I want every scanner we have pointed at that ship the moment it enters the detection grid, Sarah ordered, her command voice cutting through the fog of speculation. Full spectrum analysis, quantum resonance mapping, everything, and prep the Atlantic defense platform for emergency activation. Ma'am, Torres spoke up hesitantly, the Atlantic platform hasn't been tested since the reconstruction. If we fire it up now, then we'll know whether humanity's last ace in the hole still works, Sarah finished grimly. The Atlantic platform was one of the few surface installations that had survived the hegemony's initial demonstration, protected by layers of experimental shielding and buried deep beneath the ocean floor. It housed humanity's most advanced weapon, a gravitational manipulation device that could theoretically tear apart enemy ships at the molecular level. Theoretically. As the hours ticked by, Sarah found herself packing the length of the command center, her mind racing through scenarios and contingencies. The approaching ship could change everything or nothing at all. But for the first time in months, there was something other than despair in the air, a fragile, dangerous thing called hope. The mysterious vessel had been humanity's sole focus for nearly 12 hours when the first anomaly appeared on the quantum resonance scanners. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the command center's chief scientist, stood frozen before her console, her face pale as Arctic snow. The readings dancing across her screens defied everything humanity knew about physics, about reality itself. "Commander," Dr. Vasquez called out, her voice carrying an odd mixture of terror and fascination. "You need to see this immediately. The approaching ship. It's not just one vessel." Sarah rushed to the scientist's station, her heart hammering against her ribs. The quantum scanner displayed what appeared to be a single ship, but the deeper readings told a different story entirely. Overlapping energy signatures, multiple quantum entanglement patterns, temporal displacement echoes. It was as if dozens of ships occupied the exact same space simultaneously. "That's impossible," Sarah breathed. But even as she spoke the words, she knew that impossibility had become humanity's constant companion since the hegemony's arrival. "The energy patterns are definitely human, but they're wrong somehow," Dr. Vasquez explained, her fingers dancing across the holographic controls. "It's as if the ship exists in multiple dimensions at once or multiple timelines, and there's something else. The quantum signature keeps shifting like it's trying to communicate." Before Sarah could respond, Lieutenant Torres nearly fell from his chair. "Commander, we're receiving a transmission, but it's not coming through any of our normal channels. It's coming through the quantum foam itself, directly into our neural implants." The voice that suddenly filled their minds was hauntingly familiar, yet changed in ways that chilled them to the bone. It was Admiral Morrison, the commanding officer of the Ninth Fleet, but his words carried harmonics that no human throat should be able to produce. This is Admiral Morrison of the Ninth Fleet, or what remains of our understanding of such concepts. We have evolved beyond your current comprehension. The mission was successful, Sarah. We found a way to save humanity, but the cost. His voice fractured into multiple frequencies, as if dozens of versions of himself were speaking simultaneously. The cost was everything we once were. The transmission cut to static, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Sarah's hands gripped the edge of the console so tightly her knuckles turned white. The Ninth Fleet had found a solution, but at what price? And why did Morrison's voice sound like it came from everywhere and nowhere at once? "Commander, the ship has changed course," Torres reported, his voice shaking. "It's no longer heading for Earth, it's moving toward the Hegemony Advance Fleet." On the main display, the tactical situation shifted dramatically. The lone vessel that defied comprehension was accelerating at impossible speeds, its trajectory carrying it directly into the path of the approaching alien armada. But as it moved, something extraordinary began to happen. Space itself seemed to bend around the ship, creating distortions that the sensors couldn't properly classify. "My God," Dr. Vasquez whispered, her scientific mind struggling to process what she was witnessing. "The ship is manipulating space-time directly. It's not using conventional propulsion at all. It's folding reality." Sarah watched in fascination and growing horror as the mysterious vessel approached the Hegemony Fleet. The aliens, who had seemed so invincible just hours before, suddenly appeared to be in disarray. Their perfect formations scattered like startled birds as their sensors detected something that shouldn't exist, a human ship that had transcended the very laws of physics. Another transmission crackled through their neural implants, but this time it carried voices from across the entire Ninth Fleet. Hundreds of officers and crew members speaking in perfect unison, their words overlapping yet somehow remaining comprehensible. "We volunteered for this mission knowing we might not return," the collective voice explained. "What we didn't know was that return itself would become meaningless. The Hegemony showed us their true power, Sarah, the ability to exist across multiple dimensions simultaneously. They are not merely advanced, they are evolved beyond singular existence." The display showed the first contact between the transformed Ninth Fleet and the Hegemony Armada. What Sarah witnessed next would haunt her for the rest of her life. The human ship didn't fire weapons or engage in conventional combat. Instead, it simply absorbed the alien vessels. One by one, the Hegemony ships vanished into the spatial distortions surrounding the Ninth Fleet, their matter and energy becoming part of something larger, more complex. "We learned their secrets," the voices continued, now carrying harmonics from alien throats as well as human ones. "But to defeat them, we had to become them. We exist now in all possible realities simultaneously, every choice made, every path taken, every quantum possibility. We are victory and defeat, salvation and damnation, hope and despair all at once." Sarah realized with growing dread that the Ninth Fleet had discovered something far worse than simple alien technology. They had found a way to transcend individual existence itself, becoming a collective consciousness that spanned multiple realities. They had saved humanity by sacrificing their humanity. The Hegemony ruled through fear of the unknown, the collective voice explained as more alien ships disappeared into the quantum storm surrounding them. "But we have become the unknown itself. They cannot destroy what exists in all possible states of being. They cannot subjugate what has already transcended the very concept of subjugation." As Sarah watched, the tide of battle turned in humanity's favor through methods that violated every law of physics she understood. The Hegemony's vast armada, which should have been unstoppable, was being systematically absorbed into something that defied classification. The aliens' own transcendent abilities, which had made them seem godlike, were being turned against them by humans who had paid the ultimate price for power. But victory felt like ashes in Sarah's mouth. The Ninth Fleet had saved Earth, but they had ceased to be human in any meaningful sense. They existed now as something beyond individual identity, beyond personal relationships, beyond the very concepts of life and death as humanity understood them. They had become living weapons of infinite possibility, guardians who could never again be welcomed home. "We can never return to Earth," the voices confirmed, as if reading her thoughts across the vast distance of space. "Our presence would destabilize reality itself in ways that would unmake everything you hold dear. We exist now in the spaces between spaces, the guardians of a humanity we can no longer be part of. But Earth is safe. Our families are safe. That must be enough. The last of the hegemony ships vanished into the quantum maelstrom, and suddenly the approaching threat that had terrorized humanity for over a year was simply gone. Not destroyed, but transformed, absorbed into something that existed beyond the normal boundaries of reality. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she realized that humanity had won the war by losing what made them human in the first place. 3 days after the hegemony fleet's disappearance, Sarah stood in her private quarters, staring at a photograph that had become both treasure and torment. The image showed her younger brother Marcus, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Chen of the 9th Fleet, smiling beside his newborn daughter on the day before departure. Little Emma would be 8 months old now, taking her first steps in the underground nurseries of New Geneva, growing up in a world her father had died to save. Except he hadn't died at all, which somehow made it infinitely worse. A soft chime from her personal communicator interrupted her grief. The caller ID showed a name that stopped her heart, Marcus Chen, personal channel. With trembling fingers, Sarah accepted the call. The holographic projection that materialized before her was simultaneously her brother and not her brother. He looked exactly as she remembered, the same crooked smile, the same scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood accident, but his eyes held depths that seemed to contain entire galaxies. When he spoke, his voice carried the echo of cosmic winds. "Hello, sister," Marcus said, and despite everything, Sarah nearly collapsed with relief at hearing those familiar words. "I know this is difficult to understand. Hell, I don't fully understand it myself, and I'm living it. But I needed to see you to explain what we've become and why we can never come home." "Marcus," Sarah whispered, reaching toward the projection before remembering it was only light and memory. "What did they do to you? What did you become?" His smile was heartbreakingly sad. "We became necessary, Sarah. When we reached the hegemony core worlds, we discovered the truth about their empire. They weren't just conquering species, they were harvesting them. Every race they absorbed became part of their collective consciousness. Their individual identities dissolved into something larger and more terrible. Billions of civilizations, Sarah, trillions of souls, all trapped within their multi-dimensional existence." The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. The hegemony wasn't just an empire, it was a cosmic parasite, feeding on the consciousness of entire species. Humanity hadn't just been facing conquest, they had been facing spiritual extinction on a scale beyond comprehension. "We found the remnants of the first species they absorbed," Marcus continued, his form flickering between different versions of himself. Older, younger, scarred, pristine, as if all possible versions of her brother existed simultaneously. "They called themselves the Architects, and they had been fighting the hegemony from within for millennia. They taught us the only way to truly defeat such an enemy was to become something it couldn't consume, something that existed in all possible states at once." Sarah's scientific mind reeled at the implications. "You became a quantum superposition of consciousness, but Marcus, that should have torn you apart at the subatomic level." "It did," he replied simply. "We died, Sarah, all of us, but we also lived in every possible variation of existence. We became the sum total of all our potential selves across infinite realities. The pain was indescribable, but so was the power." Behind Marcus's projection, Sarah could see glimpses of other transformed crew members. Captain Rodriguez speaking with her own family on Mars. Dr. Kim comforting his elderly parents in the Luna colonies. Hundreds of impossible conversations happening simultaneously across the solar system. Each transformed human was saying goodbye to the people they loved, while simultaneously being more present than they had ever been before. The hegemony's power came from their ability to exist in multiple dimensions, Marcus explained. But they remained fundamentally alien, fundamentally separate from the species they consumed. We became something different. We retained our essential humanity while transcending our physical limitations. We became the living embodiment of human adaptability and determination spread across infinite possibilities. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes, struggling to process the cosmic scale of her brother's sacrifice. "But you're still you. I can see it in your eyes, hear it in your voice. You're still Marcus." "I am Marcus," he agreed. "But I'm also every version of Marcus that could have existed, the one who died at age 7 from pneumonia, the one who became a farmer instead of a soldier, the one who never left Earth, the one who married his college sweetheart. I remember all of their lives, feel all of their loves and losses. I am singular and infinite simultaneously. The weight of that existence seemed unbearable to Sarah's limited perspective. How could a consciousness survive the memory of infinite lives, infinite possibilities? Yet somehow, her brother had not only survived, but found a way to maintain his essential self amid the chaos of unlimited existence. "There's something else you need to know," Marcus said, his expression growing grave. "The hegemony isn't gone. We absorbed their fleet, but their true power lies in the home worlds, in the billions of consciousness they've harvested over the eons. They will rebuild, adapt, evolve new strategies. This victory bought humanity time, but it didn't end the war." Sarah felt her brief moment of relief crumble. "How long do we have?" "Years, maybe decades if we're fortunate. But they will return, Sarah, and when they do, they'll be prepared for what we've become. That's why we need you to do something that will seem impossible." Marcus's projection leaned forward, and for a moment, Sarah could swear she felt his presence as if he were actually in the room with her. "We need you to prepare humanity for transcendence, not the kind we underwent, that was born of desperation and war, but a voluntary evolution, a conscious choice to become something greater while retaining what makes us human." The request seemed absurd on its surface. How could humanity choose to undergo the kind of transformation that had scattered the Ninth Fleet across infinite realities? How could they maintain their essential humanity while becoming something cosmically vast? "The architects left us something," Marcus explained, as if sensing her doubts. "Knowledge hidden in the quantum foam itself, accessible only to consciousness that exists across multiple dimensions. Instructions for a different kind of evolution, one that preserves individual identity while granting collective power. But it requires unity of purpose, a choice made by humanity as a whole." Sarah's mind reeled with the implications. Her brother was asking her to convince 8 billion people to voluntarily undergo a transformation that would fundamentally alter what it meant to be human. It seemed like an impossible task, yet the alternative was eventual extinction at the hands of an enemy that viewed consciousness itself as food. "How?" she asked simply. Marcus's smile carried the warmth of 1,000 different versions of himself. "The same way humans have always achieved the impossible, sister. One person at a time, one choice at a time, one act of courage building upon another until the impossible becomes inevitable. We've bought you time to plant the seeds of evolution. Use it wisely." The projection began to fade as Marcus's consciousness was pulled back to his cosmic duties. But before he disappeared entirely, he spoke one final message that would echo in Sarah's mind for years to come. "Tell Emma about her father," he said. "Tell her that he loved her across infinite realities, and that everything we became was to ensure she could grow up in a universe where love still matters more than power." As the connection severed, Sarah found herself alone with the weight of humanity's future pressing down upon her shoulders. In the distance, she could hear the celebrations beginning as news of the hegemony fleet's destruction spread throughout the underground cities. Humanity thought they had won, but Sarah now knew that the real war was just beginning, a war not for survival, but for the very soul of what it meant to be human in a universe where consciousness itself had become the ultimate battlefield. 2 years had passed since the Day of Transcendence, as historians had begun calling it, and Sarah stood before the Global Council in what remained of the United Nations building. The massive chamber, carved from living rock beneath the Mediterranean seafloor, buzzed with tension as representatives from every surviving human settlement argued about humanity's next evolutionary step. The debates had raged for months, splitting families, governments, and entire colonies as people struggled with an impossible choice. The Transcendence Protocol sat before them like a loaded weapon, complete instructions left by the Ninth Fleet for humanity's voluntary evolution into multidimensional beings. Dr. Vasquez had spent 18 months decoding the quantum mathematics, working with teams of physicists, philosophers, and consciousness researchers to understand the process. The science was sound, terrifying in its implications, but undeniably functional. Humanity could choose to evolve, but the choice had to be unanimous. A single dissenter would doom the entire species to remain vulnerable to the hegemony's eventual return. "We're talking about the extinction of human individuality," shouted Colonel Petrov from the Siberian Collective, his augmented voice echoing through the chamber. "These quantum ghosts may claim to retain their humanity, but they're as alien as the enemy they defeated. We'd be trading one form of slavery for another." Sarah watched the heated exchange from her position at the central podium, remembering similar arguments that had consumed her own thoughts for months. The philosophical implications were staggering. If humanity transcended individual existence, would they still be human? Or would they become something entirely new, cosmic entities wearing the memory of humanity like a discarded skin? The Colonel speaks from fear, countered Dr. Yuki Tanaka from the Japanese deep cities. But fear has already cost us our home world's surface, our blue skies, our connection to the Earth our ancestors knew. The Ninth Fleet offers us something the hegemony never could, evolution by choice rather than conquest by force. The debate was interrupted by an urgent alarm. Tors, now promoted to commander and Sarah's right hand, materialized as a hologram at her side. His face was pale with the kind of terror that came from monitoring the edges of known space. Commander Chen were detecting massive quantum disturbances near Alpha Centauri. The deep space arrays are picking up energy signatures consistent with hegemony construction, but on a scale we've never seen before. They're building something, Sarah, something enormous. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The hegemony hadn't been idle during humanity's 2 years of deliberation. While Earth debated evolution, their enemies had been preparing something that dwarfed their previous invasion force. How long, Sarah asked, though she dreaded the answer. Conservative estimates suggest 6 months before whatever they're building becomes operational. The quantum resonance patterns indicate it's not a fleet, Commander. It's a single structure, but it's the size of a small moon. And the energy readings, Tors paused, swallowing hard. It's generating power equivalent to a star. Sarah felt the familiar ice of despair creeping up her spine. Humanity had squandered their reprieve arguing about philosophy, while their enemies prepared a weapon of unimaginable destruction. The Ninth Fleet had bought them time, but time was a resource they had failed to use wisely. But then something unexpected happened. The chamber's central communication array activated spontaneously, filling the air with the familiar harmonics of the transformed Ninth Fleet. This time, however, the collective voice carried new resonances, alien frequencies that spoke of desperate alliances and impossible hope. "Citizens of Earth," the voice began, and Sarah recognized not just Marcus but dozens of other familiar voices woven into the quantum symphony. "We bring urgent news from the deep void. The hegemony is indeed preparing a final assault, but they are not alone in their preparations." The holographic display shimmered and transformed, showing vast star charts marked with patterns of movement that defied conventional understanding. Hundreds of quantum signatures moved through space like schools of cosmic fish, converging from all directions toward the galactic core. "We have found them," the collective voice continued, and now Sarah could hear new harmonics, alien voices speaking in frequencies that no human throat had ever produced. The survivors. The architects were not the only species to achieve transcendence before absorption. Hidden throughout the galaxy, in the spaces between reality, other transcended civilizations have waited for millennia for the chance to strike back. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The Ninth Fleet hadn't just gained the power to fight the hegemony. They had discovered an entire resistance movement of evolved consciousness that had been preparing for this moment across geological time scales. The Korathi, who became living mathematics after their physical extinction 2 million years ago. The Zephyrians, who transformed into pure thought when their star went supernova. The Eternals, who achieved consciousness transcendence during the last galactic cycle. We are not alone in this fight, and neither are you. Colonel Petrov stood slowly, his face ashen. "Are you telling us that the entire galaxy is populated by ghosts, consciousness without form?" "We are telling you that consciousness is the ultimate evolution of matter," the collective replied. "Physical form is merely the first stage of existence. The hegemony understood this, which is why they sought to harvest and control evolved consciousness rather than simply destroying physical bodies. But they made a fundamental error. They believed consciousness could be owned, contained, subjugated. They were wrong." The display showed the hegemony's new weapon more clearly now, a massive sphere of crystalline material that pulsed with dark energy. But surrounding it, barely visible even to the enhanced sensors, were the quantum signatures of the transcended resistance. They were already there, waiting. "The hegemony's weapon is designed to unravel the quantum foam itself." Marcus's individual voice emerged from the collective, speaking directly to Sarah. "They plan to collapse the dimensional barriers that allow transcended consciousness to exist. If they succeed, Every evolved species in the galaxy will be forced back into physical form, vulnerable, mortal, ready for harvest. Dr. Tanaka leaned forward in her seat. And if we undergo transcendence now, what happens to us when they activate their weapon? That is the choice before you, the collective replied. Remain physical and face certain absorption when the hegemony returns in force, or evolve now and risk potential dissolution when their weapon activates. But there is a third option, one that requires courage beyond anything humanity has yet displayed. Sarah felt her heart hammering as she anticipated what was coming. Tell us. Join the battle not as transcended beings, but as the bridge between physical and quantum existence. The weapon cannot target what exists in both states simultaneously. We need humanity to remain partially physical while gaining access to transcended abilities. You would become the anchor point that allows the resistance to remain stable when reality itself comes under attack. The chamber erupted in chaos as the implications became clear. Humanity wouldn't just be choosing evolution. They would be volunteering to become the quantum equivalent of living shields, protecting billions of transcended consciousness while remaining vulnerable enough to maintain connection to physical reality. The process is untested. Dr. Vasquez's voice cut through the noise as she appeared via hologram from her research station. We'd be attempting something that has never been tried in galactic history, partial transcendence while maintaining physical anchoring. The failure rate could be catastrophic. And if we refuse? Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. Then the hegemony wins everything, Marcus replied, his quantum existence allowing him to speak with the certainty of someone who had seen all possible futures. They activate their weapon, collapse the resistance, absorb the consciousness of every transcended species in the galaxy, and become gods of a universe where no other thinking beings can exist. Earth becomes their final prize, 8 billion souls to complete their cosmic harvest. Sarah looked around the chamber at the faces of humanity's last leaders. She saw fear, determination, anger, and hope warring in their expressions. These people had already survived the impossible, the destruction of their world's surface, the revelation of hostile alien empires, the transcendence of their own children and loved ones. Now they faced perhaps the most important choice in the history of consciousness itself. How long do we have to decide? She asked. The hegemony weapon will be operational in 4 months, the collective replied. The partial transcendence process requires 3 months to complete safely. You have 30 days to reach consensus, Sarah. 30 days to convince 8 billion people to volunteer for an evolution that might save the galaxy or destroy everything they've ever known. As the transmission ended and the quantum echoes faded, Sarah realized that humanity's greatest test wasn't behind them. It lay ahead. In convincing an entire species to risk everything they were for the chance to become something they had never imagined possible. The voting had taken place over 3 agonizing weeks, conducted through quantum-encrypted networks that connected every human settlement from the deepest Earth bunkers to the farthest asteroid mining stations. Sarah had watched the numbers climb with a mixture of hope and terror. 2 billion in favor, 800 million against, with millions still undecided as the final hours approached. The margin was impossibly close for something that required absolute unanimity. Now, standing in the primary transformation chamber beneath what had once been the Pacific Ocean, Sarah felt the weight of those final holdouts like physical pain. The chamber itself was a marvel of human and transcended engineering, a crystalline cavern the size of a cathedral, its walls inscribed with equations that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously. Similar chambers had been constructed on every major human settlement, connected through quantum entanglement to ensure the transformation occurred simultaneously across all of human space. Final count coming in from the Titan colonies, Torres reported, his voice echoing in the vast space. Around them, thousands of volunteers lay in gleaming cocoons of quantum metal, their bodies already beginning the preliminary stages of partial transcendence. Sarah had volunteered to be among the first, knowing that leadership required her to face the unknown before asking others to follow. "What's the number?" Sarah asked, though her heart already knew the answer from Tor's expression. 7,999,874,612 in favor. 225,387,388 against. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the dreams of transcended species across the galaxy tremble with anticipation and despair. They had come so close, closer than any species in galactic history, to achieving voluntary unanimous evolution. But close wasn't enough when dealing with quantum consciousness transformation. Then something impossible happened. The chamber's communication array activated without any input from the human technicians, filling the air with a voice that Sarah recognized, but had never expected to hear again. President Elena Vasquez, who had died in the hegemony's initial attack 2 years earlier. "My fellow humans," the impossible voice began, carrying harmonics that belonged to neither the living nor the transcended. "I speak to you from the threshold between existence and evolution, from a place that is neither life nor death, but something far more profound." Sarah's breath caught as she understood what was happening. The quantum mathematics had been wrong, not incorrect, but incomplete. The resistance movement of transcended species hadn't just been fighting the hegemony. They had been rescuing consciousness from across time itself, pulling the awareness of beings who had died before achieving transcendence into a quantum holding state. "We are the in-between," President Vasquez continued, her voice now joined by millions of others, every human who had died since the hegemony's arrival, preserved in quantum amber by the transcended resistance. "We exist in the space between life and evolution, waiting for our species to choose its path. We cannot move forward to transcendence, but we can choose to anchor ourselves to physical reality one final time." Sarah realized with growing awe that they weren't facing unanimous choice at all. They were facing unanimous participation. The dead were volunteering to serve as quantum bridges, their preserved consciousness acting as the foundation for humanity's partial transcendence. Every person who had died during the hegemony crisis would become part of the transformation process, their sacrifice giving meaning beyond anything they could have imagined. "The math works now?" Dr. Vasquez's voice emerged from her research station, tears streaming down her face as she spoke to the quantum echo of her own dead sister. "If the in-between anchor the transformation, we can achieve partial transcendence with a 97% survival rate. The quantum bridges stabilize the process." Sarah felt tears of her own as she understood the full scope of what was being offered. Humanity wouldn't just evolve. They would evolve together with those they had lost, creating a form of existence that honored both the living and the dead while preparing for the cosmic battle ahead. "Initiate transformation protocol," Sarah commanded, her voice carrying across every human settlement simultaneously. "All stations report ready." The process began with a sensation that defied description, like being gently pulled apart at the molecular level while simultaneously being woven into something infinitely larger. Sarah felt her consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of her skull, touching the minds of every other human undergoing the same transformation. But instead of losing herself in the collective, she found her individual identity strengthened by connection to the quantum echoes of the dead. She could feel her parents, killed in the Beijing strike, their love and pride flowing through quantum channels that transcended death itself. She could sense her childhood friend Maria, lost in the evacuation of Rome, her laughter echoing across dimensional boundaries. Most powerfully, she could feel Marcus's presence not as the cosmic entity he had become, but as the brother she remembered, preserved in quantum potential by those who existed in between. The transformation cascaded across human space like a wave of liquid starlight. On Mars, families held hands as their consciousness expanded to encompass multiple probability states, while their bodies remained anchored to physical reality. In the Jupiter system, mining crews found themselves able to perceive and manipulate matter at the quantum level while still maintaining their essential humanity. Throughout the asteroid belt, research stations became nodes in a vast network of hybrid consciousness that spanned both physical and quantum dimensions. But the most profound change occurred when humanity made contact with the transcended resistance. For the first time in galactic history, physical beings could communicate directly with quantum entities without losing their individual identity. Sarah found herself speaking with the architects themselves, not the absorbed remnants within the hegemony, but the free consciousness that had hidden in quantum space for millions of years. "You have achieved something we thought impossible," the architect collective communicated through harmonics that felt like crystalline music in Sarah's expanded awareness. "Partial transcendence with identity preservation. You exist simultaneously in physical reality and quantum space, serving as bridges between states of being. With this capability, we can finally implement the final protocol. Sarah felt a chill of anticipation as new knowledge flowed into her consciousness, not just from the architects, but from every transcended species in the galactic resistance. The final protocol wasn't just about defeating the hegemony, it was about fundamentally restructuring the nature of consciousness in the universe. The hegemony's power comes from their monopoly on transcendence, the collective explained. They became the only force capable of existing across multiple dimensions, making them seem godlike to physical species. But if consciousness evolution becomes available to all beings, if the barriers between physical and quantum existence are permanently lowered. Sarah completed the thought with growing wonder. The hegemony becomes just another evolved species instead of cosmic parasites. They lose their advantage because everyone gains access to transcendence. Precisely. But implementation requires a network of bridge beings, consciousness that can exist in both states and help others make the transition safely. Humanity has become that bridge, the missing link that allows voluntary evolution instead of forced absorption. As the transformation reached completion, Sarah felt herself settling into her new existence. She remained undeniably human. She could still feel her heartbeat, still taste the recycled air of the chamber, still remember the warmth of sunlight on her skin from before the world changed. But she could also perceive quantum probability streams, communicate across dimensional barriers, and feel the presence of every other consciousness in human space as a gentle warmth in the back of her mind. The truly miraculous part was that she wasn't alone in this new existence. The in-between remained with them, the consciousness of the dead serving as permanent quantum anchors that kept humanity's transcended abilities stable and safe. Death had become not an ending, but a transformation into a different kind of existence, one that supported and protected the living. 4 months later, when the hegemony's reality collapse weapon activated, they discovered that their ultimate strategy had been turned against them. Instead of forcing transcended beings back into vulnerable physical form, the weapon encountered humanity's bridge network and was redirected, becoming a tool for voluntary consciousness evolution rather than forced regression. Species across the galaxy were offered a choice for the first time in millions of years: remain physical and free, or evolve beyond form while maintaining individual identity. The hegemony's empire of forced absorption crumbled as their subjects chose voluntary transcendence over parasitic consumption. Sarah watched from her quantum physical hybrid perspective as the cosmic balance shifted permanently. The universe had become a place where consciousness could evolve freely, where death was transformation rather than ending, and where the choice to transcend remained always a choice rather than a conquest. Humanity had not only survived, they had become the key that unlocked freedom for every thinking being in the cosmos. Marcus appeared beside her in the chamber, not as a hologram, but as a true presence spanning both quantum and physical reality. "We did it, sister. Not just survival, but something better. We made the universe safe for consciousness itself." Sarah smiled, feeling the warmth of 8 billion human minds connected yet distinct, supported by the loving presence of all those who had gone before. Humanity had faced extinction and chosen evolution, but they had done so without losing the essential spark that made them human. In saving themselves, they had inadvertently saved everyone. The war was over. The real adventure was just beginning.